The first golf cart rolled past my kitchen window at 7:04 in the morning, a string of red, white, and blue bunting flapping against its roof, and I set my coffee down on the counter without taking a sip. The cart was not on the street. It was not on the sidewalk. It was on my green lane, the narrow strip of gravel and grass that runs between the old stone wall and the hedge line. The lane my father had maintained for 42 years before I took over the property, and there were more carts coming behind it. I could hear the tinny music from a portable speaker, the laughter of children, and the distinct whine of an electric motor that should not have been anywhere near my land. I stepped onto the back porch in my bare feet, still holding the coffee mug, and watched a second cart appear, then a third, then a group of kids on decorated bicycles with crepe paper woven through the spokes, and behind them, a flatbed trailer being towed by a John Deere Gator with a banner that read Oakwood Preserve Independence Parade in iron-on letters. The banner was new. The parade was not supposed to be here, and the woman standing in the lead cart holding a clipboard and wearing a visor and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest was Karen Whitmore, the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, and she was waving at me like I was supposed to be delighted. I did not wave back. I took a picture with my phone, walked back inside, and pulled a manila folder out of the filing cabinet in the hallway. The folder was labeled Green Lane, Right-of-Way Records, and it had been sitting in that drawer for 11 years, ever since my father handed me the deed and told me to keep the paperwork close. Karen Whitmore had no idea what was inside that folder. She had no idea that the parade she was leading had already been routed through a legal dead end, and she had no idea that by the time the sheriff's deputy arrived 3 hours later, the entire HOA would be standing in the middle of my lane, staring at a county record that proved they had no right to be there at all. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. The Green Lane is not a road. It never was. It is a 12-foot wide strip of crushed gravel and clover that runs for about 300 yards along the eastern edge of my property, bordered on one side by a dry-stacked stone wall that my great-grandfather built in 1921, and on the other by a row of mature boxwood hedges that my mother planted in 1987. The lane connects the back of my property to a small access gate that opens onto the county road, and it was originally used as a farm track when this land was still part of a working orchard. The orchard is gone now, replaced by the Oakwood Preserve subdivision, a development of 63 houses that went in during the mid-1990s. But the lane remained, and so did the stone wall, and so did the hedges. My father bought the property in 1978, before the HOA existed, before the subdivision was even a glint in a developer's eye, and he spent decades maintaining the lane, re-graveling it every few years, trimming the hedges, repairing the wall after storms, and keeping the drainage culvert clear so the whole thing wouldn't wash out during heavy rain. When he died in 2012, I inherited the house, the 5 acres, and the lane, along with a box of documents that included the original deed, the survey plat, and a quiet title action that my father had filed in 1994 to resolve a boundary dispute with the developer who was building Oakwood Preserve. That quiet title action was the reason the lane was still mine. It was the reason the HOA had never been able to claim it. And it was the reason Karen Whitmore's parade was about to become the most expensive mistake the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association had ever made. I am not a lawyer. I am a civil engineer, which means I read documents carefully, I understand property boundaries, and I know how to find the recorded history of a piece of land. I work for a firm that designs stormwater management systems, and I spend most of my days reviewing drainage plans, easement agreements, and county parcel maps. I am comfortable with paperwork. I am comfortable with waiting, and I am comfortable with letting people talk until they say something they cannot take back. Karen Whitmore was not comfortable with any of those things. She was comfortable with authority, with laminated maps, with clipboards, with the sound of her own voice over a microphone at HOA meetings, and with the assumption that everyone in Oakwood Preserve would do what she said because she had been president of the board for 6 years, and no one had ever seriously challenged her. She was 58 years old, a retired real estate agent who had sold half the houses in the subdivision herself, and she treated the HOA like a personal fiefdom. She had a white Lexus SUV that she parked in the fire lane during board meetings. She had a key to the community pool that she used for private parties, and she had a laminated map of the subdivision that she carried to every public event, a map that showed the green lane as a dotted line labeled Community Access Path, a label that had no legal basis whatsoever, but had been printed on the developer's marketing brochure in 1995 and had somehow survived into Karen's mental model of the neighborhood. That map was the root of everything that happened. That map, and the fact that Karen had never once checked the county records to see if it was accurate. The first time I realized Karen had her eye on the green lane was in March, 4 months before the parade. I was out by the stone wall, repairing a section that had slumped during the winter rains, when her white Lexus pulled up on the county road and she rolled down the window. She was wearing sunglasses and a pink cardigan, and she had a travel mug in the cup holder that said HOA President, Oakwood Preserve in gold letters. She did not get out of the car. She just leaned across the passenger seat and called through the open window. "That lane is looking a little rough," she said. "The board has been discussing whether we need to take over maintenance. It's really more of a community asset than a private driveway, don't you think?" I set down the stone I was holding and wiped my hands on my jeans. "It's private property," I said. "It's been private property since before the HOA existed. The maintenance is my responsibility, and it's handled." She smiled the way people smile when they think you don't understand how things work. "Well, we'll see about that," she said. "The board has access to records you might not be aware of." Then she rolled up the window and drove away, and I stood there in the gravel with the dust settling around my boots and thought about the folder in my filing cabinet, the one with the quiet title action and the county survey, and the letter from the developer's own attorney acknowledging that the lane was not part of the subdivision. I did not call her back. I did not argue. I just finished repairing the wall, went inside, and added a note to the folder with the date and time of the conversation. People like Karen Whitmore mistake silence for fear. I have never been afraid of paperwork. The second time was in May. I came home from work to find a yellow envelope taped to my front door, the kind of envelope that looks official but isn't, with the HOA logo printed in the corner and a violation notice inside. The notice claimed that the green lane was an unmaintained community access corridor and that I was in violation of HOA Covenant 14.7, which required homeowners to maintain any shared access paths adjacent to their property. The notice gave me 30 days to restore the lane to community standards, which included re-graveling, trimming the hedges back by 2 feet, and removing the stone wall because it posed a safety hazard to pedestrians. The fine for non-compliance was $200 per day. I read the notice 3 times, standing in my kitchen with the yellow paper in my hand, and then I did something that Karen Whitmore had not anticipated. I looked up Covenant 14.7 in the HOA documents that had been included with my property when I inherited it. The covenant did exist, but it applied only to shared access paths as defined in the recorded plat map of Oakwood Preserve, Phase 2. The green lane was not on the recorded plat map. It was not in Phase 2. It was not in any phase of Oakwood Preserve. It was on a separate parcel, parcel number 14-7203019, which had been excluded from the subdivision by the quiet title action in 1994. Karen had either not read the covenant she was citing, or she had assumed I would not read it. Either way, she had made her first mistake. She had put the false claim in writing. I took the yellow notice, made a copy, and added it to the folder. Then I wrote a letter to the HOA board, sent by certified mail, explaining that the green lane was private property, that Covenant 14.7 did not apply, and that any further attempts to assert authority over the lane would be met with legal action. I included a copy of the quiet title judgment and the county parcel map. I did not expect Karen to back down. I expected her to escalate, and she did. 3 days later, I received a response from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gerald Fisk, who worked out of a strip mall office in the next town over, and who had apparently been advising the Oakwood Preserve Board for years, without ever once checking the actual property records. His letter was 2 pages long and used a lot of words like purported and alleged and disputed, but the core argument was simple. The green lane had been used by residents of Oakwood Preserve for more than 20 years, which meant it had become a prescriptive easement, a public right-of-way by virtue of long-term use. The letter cited a state statute and demanded that I cease and desist from interfering with community access or face a lawsuit. I read the letter at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, something closer to relief. Because Gerald Fisk had just handed me the second piece of evidence I needed. The prescriptive easement argument was interesting, But it had a fatal flaw. In my state, a prescriptive easement cannot be established if the use was permissive, and the developer of Oakwood Preserve had explicitly requested permission to use the lane during construction in 1995, permission that my father had granted in writing for a period of 18 months, after which the permission had expired and had never been renewed. The letter was in the folder. The expiration date was in the folder, and Gerald Fisk had just claimed, in writing, that the HOA's entire legal theory rested on a use that had started with a permission letter that had been dead for 28 years. I did not respond to the letter immediately. I let it sit. I let Karen and Gerald believe they had me cornered, and I started preparing for the parade. I found out about the parade route on June 28th, 6 days before the 4th of July. One of my neighbors, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Okonkwo, who lived 3 houses down and had always been decent to me, stopped by my fence while I was trimming the hedges and mentioned that the HOA had sent out an email about the Independence Day celebration. "They're doing a parade this year," she said. "Karen's really excited about it. She's got the whole route mapped out. It goes right down your lane, apparently. She says it's the perfect spot for the lineup." I stopped trimming and looked at her. "My lane is private property," I said. "Did the email mention that?" Margaret shrugged. Karen said it was a community access path. She said the board had confirmed it. Everyone's pretty excited. The kids are decorating their bikes and everything. I thanked Margaret for the information and went back to trimming the hedges, but my mind was already working. Karen had not just claimed the lane in a letter to me. She had announced it to the entire neighborhood. She had built an event around it. She had involved children, families, decorations, a parade marshal, a route map, and probably a permit from the county. She had committed herself so publicly that backing down would be humiliating. And she had done it without ever once checking the county records. That was her third mistake, the public commitment, the one that would make the reversal impossible to hide. I spent the next 3 days doing what I do best, documenting. I drove to the county recorder's office on Monday morning and pulled every document related to parcel 147203-019, the Green Lane, and the Oakwood Preserve subdivision. I already had most of them in my folder, but I wanted certified copies with fresh date stamps, the kind of copies that a sheriff's deputy would recognize as official. I also pulled the records for the old right-of-way that had once crossed the northern edge of my property, a right-of-way that had been established in 1963 for a farm access road that no longer existed. That right-of-way was the key to everything. It had been abandoned by the county in 1989, 3 years before the Oakwood Preserve development was even proposed, and the abandonment had reverted the land to the adjacent property owners, which included my father. The right-of-way had been dead for 35 years, but the developer's marketing brochure, the one Karen carried around on her laminated map, still showed it as an active community access path. The brochure was not a legal document, it was a sales tool, and Karen had built her entire understanding of the neighborhood on a sales tool. I made copies of the abandonment record, the reversion deed, the quiet title judgment, and the expired permission letter. I organized them in a clean manila envelope with a cover sheet that summarized the legal status of the Green Lane in 3 bullet points. Then I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and asked to speak with a deputy about a potential trespassing issue on the 4th of July. The dispatcher took my information and said someone would follow up. I did not expect much, but I wanted the call on record. On July 2nd, 2 days before the parade, Karen Whitmore showed up at my door. She was not alone. She had brought 2 other board members, a man named Dennis, who was the treasurer, and a woman named Patricia, who was the secretary. And they were all wearing their HOA polo shirts, like they were about to inspect a crime scene. Karen was holding her clipboard, the laminated map clipped to the front, and she had a roll of orange survey tape in her other hand. "We're marking the parade route this afternoon," she said when I opened the door. "We'll need access to the lane to put up the banners and the directional signs. The parade marshal will be here at 6 in the morning on the 4th to start lining everyone up. I wanted to give you a heads up so you're not surprised." She said this like she was doing me a favor, like she was being generous by informing me that she was about to trespass on my property with a parade. I stood in the doorway and looked at the 3 of them, the clipboard, the tape, the polo shirts, the smug certainty on Karen's face, and I felt the same calm I always feel when someone has made a mistake they don't yet understand. "The lane is private property," I said. "You do not have permission to access it, mark it, or use it for a parade. I've already sent the board a letter explaining this. I've included the county records. If you proceed, you'll be trespassing. Karen's smile tightened. We've been over this, she said. The board's attorney has reviewed the situation. The lane is a community access path under prescriptive easement. We have every right to use it. If you try to interfere with the parade, we'll have the sheriff here to remove you. She said this like it was a threat, like the sheriff would automatically take her side. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I just nodded slowly and said, "Please put that in writing." Karen blinked. What? Put it in writing, I said. Email me. Confirm that you're claiming a prescriptive easement and that you intend to use the lane for the parade despite my objection. I'd like a record. Karen looked at Dennis, then at Patricia, then back at me. Fine, she said. You'll have your email. She turned and walked back to her Lexus, and the other two followed her, and I closed the door and waited. The email arrived 20 minutes later. It was from Karen's personal email account, not the HOA's official address, and it said exactly what I needed it to say. That the board had determined the green lane was subject to a prescriptive easement, that the parade would proceed as planned, and that any interference would be considered a violation of HOA rules and reported to the sheriff. I printed the email and added it to the folder. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote a one-page summary of the legal situation, attaching the certified copies of the abandonment record, the reversion deed, and the quiet title judgment. I put the summary in an envelope and addressed it to the sheriff's department. Attention to the deputy who would be assigned to the parade detail. I drove to the station and dropped it off in person. The desk sergeant took it and said someone would review it. I did not know if anyone would, but I had done everything I could to make sure the truth was in the hands of the people who would be making decisions on the 4th of July. The morning of the parade, I woke up at 5:30. The sun was just starting to come up over the hedges, and the air was cool and smelled like cut grass and dew. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the lane. At 5:52, a white pickup truck pulled up on the county road, and a man in a reflective vest got out and started unloading orange cones from the bed. The parade marshal, I assumed. He set up the cones at the entrance to the lane, blocking the gate, and then he unrolled a banner that said, "Parade Lineup, Oakwood Preserve Independence Day," and tied it to the stone wall with zip ties. He did not knock on my door. He did not ask permission. He just treated the lane like it belonged to the HOA. I took a picture through the window. Then I got dressed, put on my boots, and walked outside with my coffee and my folder. The parade marshal looked up when he saw me. He was a big man in his 50s, with a sunburned neck and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. "Morning," he said. "You must be the homeowner. Karen said you might come out. Everything's under control. We'll have the carts lined up by 7, and the parade kicks off at 8. Should be a good time." I took a sip of my coffee. "This is private property," I said. "You don't have permission to be here. I've already informed the HOA and the sheriff's department." The parade marshal's smile faded. "Look, buddy, I'm just doing my job. Karen hired me to set up the route. If you've got a problem, take it up with her. I'm not here to argue." He turned away and went back to unloading cones. I did not push it. I just stood there, drinking my coffee, watching the lane fill up with golf carts and bicycles and children in red, white, and blue shirts. By 6:45, there were at least 40 people on my property. The carts were lined up 3 deep, decorated with streamers and balloons and little American flags. The kids on bikes were weaving between them, laughing and ringing their bells. A woman with a portable speaker was playing "God Bless the USA" at a volume that made the hedges vibrate. And at the front of the line, standing in her decorated golf cart, with the clipboard in her hand and the laminated map displayed on the dashboard, was Karen Whitmore. She was wearing a star-spangled visor and a red polo shirt, and she was directing the chaos like a general reviewing her troops. When she saw me standing by the stone wall, she waved. Actually waved, like I was a neighbor who had come out to enjoy the festivities. I did not wave back. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The sheriff's deputy arrived at 7:12. His name was Deputy Marcus Chen, and he was a young man with a calm demeanor and a body camera mounted on his chest. He parked his cruiser on the county road and walked up to the gate, looking at the crowd of people on the lane, with a expression of mild confusion. Karen saw him immediately and hurried over, clipboard in hand, her visor bobbing. "Deputy, thank you for coming," she said, her voice pitched loud enough for the crowd to hear. "We're having a small issue with the homeowner here. He's trying to disrupt the community parade. We have documentation from the HOA's attorney confirming our right to use this access path. I can show you the letter if you need it." She was already reaching into a folder she had tucked under the clipboard, a folder that I assumed contained Gerald Fisk's letter and the prescriptive easement argument. Deputy Chen held up a hand. "Ma'am, I've reviewed some materials that were dropped off at the station yesterday," he said. "I'd like to speak with the homeowner before we proceed." Karen's smile flickered. "Of course," she said. "But I want to be clear that this is a permitted community event, and we have dozens of families here who are expecting the parade to start on time." Deputy Chen nodded and walked over to where I was standing by the stone wall. I had stopped recording and was holding the folder at my side. "Sir, I'm Deputy Chen," he said. "I understand there's a dispute about this lane. Can you show me what you have?" I handed him the folder. He opened it and started reading. The first page was the cover sheet, with the 3 bullet points. The right-of-way abandoned in 1989. The reversion deed recorded in 1990. The quiet title judgment from 1994. Behind that were the certified copies, each one stamped and dated by the county recorder. Deputy Chen read slowly, his lips moving slightly, and when he finished, he looked up at the crowd of golf carts and bicycles and then back at me. "This lane is your private property," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "It has been private property since before the HOA existed. The right-of-way they're claiming was abandoned 35 years ago. The county records are clear." Deputy Chen closed the folder and handed it back to me. "I'm going to need to speak with the HOA president," he said. What happened next was the kind of public unraveling that you cannot script. Deputy Chen walked back to Karen, who was still standing by her golf cart with the clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. The crowd had started to notice that something was wrong. The music was still playing, but people were turning their heads, lowering their voices, watching the deputy and the HOA president with the instinctive attention that people give to authority figures in conflict. "Ma'am," Deputy Chen said, "I've reviewed the county records. This lane is private property. The right-of-way you're claiming was abandoned in 1989 and reverted to the adjacent landowners. The current owner has provided certified documentation. You do not have a legal right to be here." Karen's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, anger, and then something that looked almost like panic, a tightness around her mouth and eyes that suggested she was realizing, in real time, that she had made a catastrophic mistake. "That can't be right," she said. "Our attorney reviewed this. We have a prescriptive easement. The lane has been used by the community for decades." Deputy Chen shook his head. "Ma'am, a prescriptive easement requires adverse use, not permissive use. The homeowner has documentation showing that the original use was permissive and the permission expired. That's a civil matter, but what's happening right now is trespassing. You need to clear this lane." Karen's voice rose. "We have a parade. We have families here. You can't just shut this down." Deputy Chen's expression did not change. "Ma'am, I'm not shutting down your parade. I'm telling you that you cannot stage it on private property without the owner's permission. You'll need to find an alternate route." The crowd had gone quiet now. The music was still playing, but no one was listening to it. The children on the decorated bikes had stopped riding and were standing in a cluster near the hedges, watching the adults with the unerring instinct of kids who know when something has gone wrong. The parade marshal was standing by his pickup truck with his arms crossed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. And Karen Whitmore was standing in the middle of my green lane, surrounded by the evidence of her own arrogance, with a clipboard that meant nothing and a laminated map that was a work of fiction, and she was losing. She tried one more time. "I want to speak to your supervisor," she said. "This is a community event. The HOA has authority here. I don't know what paperwork this man showed you, but it's not accurate. Our attorney will confirm that." Deputy Chen's voice was patient but firm. "Ma'am, you're welcome to contact the department, but right now, I'm telling you that this lane is private property, and you need to clear it. If you don't, I'll have to start issuing citations for trespassing." Karen looked around at the crowd, at the golf carts and the bicycles and the banner that said Oakwood Preserve Independence Parade, and I could see her calculating. She was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make it look like she was the victim, how to salvage her authority. But there was no spin that could change the county records. There was no authority that could override a reversion deed. And there was no way to move 40 people and a dozen golf carts off my lane without everyone understanding exactly what had happened. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "We'll move the lineup. Everyone, we're going to relocate to the community center parking lot." Please proceed in an orderly fashion. The crowd started to stir, people climbing back into their carts, parents calling their children, the parade marshal pulling the orange cones off the gate with the expression of a man who had been paid to do a job and was now realizing he might not get paid at all. I stood by the stone wall and watched them go, the carts bumping over the gravel, the bicycles wobbling, the banner flapping in the morning breeze. Karen was the last to leave. She drove her golf cart past me with her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed straight ahead, and she did not look at me. I did not say anything. I just held the folder in my hand and waited until the lane was empty again, the gravel still marked with tire tracks and the hedges still vibrating with the memory of the music. Then I walked back to the house, made another cup of coffee, and sat down on the porch to wait for the fallout. The fallout started that afternoon. The parade had been rerouted to the community center parking lot, which was a cramped asphalt square with no shade and no charm, and by all accounts, it had been a disaster. The golf carts couldn't maneuver properly. The kids on bikes had nowhere to ride. The flatbed trailer with the banner got stuck trying to turn around, and someone's decorations caught fire from a hot exhaust pipe. It was not the triumphant community event that Karen had promised. It was a shambles, and everyone knew it. My phone started ringing around 2 o'clock. The first call was from Margaret Okonkwo, the retired schoolteacher. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know the lane was private. Karen told everyone it was a community path. I feel terrible that we were all on your property without permission." I told her it was all right, that she hadn't known, and that I appreciated the call. The second call was from Dennis, the HOA treasurer. His voice was strained. "Listen," he said, "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the lane. The board is going to need to review the documentation you provided. Karen is, well, she's not happy, but I think we need to have a conversation about how to move forward." I told him I was open to a conversation, but that any conversation would need to include an acknowledgement that the lane was private property and a plan for repairing the damage that the parade had caused. "Damage?" Dennis said. "What damage?" I told him to come look at the hedges. The hedges were the emotional anchor of this whole story, and I haven't talked about them enough yet. My mother planted those boxwoods in 1987, the year I turned 12. She spent an entire spring digging the holes, mixing compost into the soil, setting each plant at exactly the right depth, and watering them by hand every evening until they were established. She died in 2003, and those hedges were one of the few things I had left of her, a living wall of green that she had shaped and tended and loved. When the parade carts had lined up on the lane, several of them had pulled too close to the hedge line, and the bumpers and trailers had scraped against the branches, breaking some and tearing others. There were gouges in the foliage, bare patches where leaves had been stripped away, and one section near the gate where a whole branch had been snapped off and was hanging by a strip of bark. I had taken pictures of all of it, close-ups with a ruler for scale, wide shots showing the context, and I had already sent the pictures to a horticulturist I knew, who specialized in historic plantings. Her preliminary estimate for restoration was $4,200. That did not include the cost of regraveling the lane where the carts had chewed up the surface, or the cost of repairing the stone wall where the parade marshal had zip-tied the banner and pulled out a chunk of mortar. The total damage, by my calculation, was somewhere around $6,800, and I intended to make the HOA pay every cent. Dennis came by the next day with Patricia, the secretary. They walked the lane with me, looking at the hedges and the wall and the gravel, and their expressions got grimmer with every step. "This is bad," Patricia said. "Karen didn't tell us there was any risk of damage. She said the lane was wide enough for the carts and that the hedges wouldn't be an issue." "Karen didn't check," I said. "She didn't check the county records, she didn't check the property boundaries, and she didn't check whether the lane could handle the traffic. She just assumed." Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. "The board is going to have to address this. There's going to be a special meeting. I think you should come." I told him I would. I also told him that I expected the HOA to cover the repair costs, and that if they didn't, I would file a claim with their insurance carrier and a complaint with the county about the unauthorized use of private property. Dennis nodded slowly. "I'll make sure the board understands the situation," he said. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had been following Karen Whitmore for years and was just now realizing where she had led him. The special meeting was held on July 10th in the community center, the same community center whose parking lot had hosted the disastrous parade. The room was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood about what had happened, and people were angry. Not at me, at Karen. They were angry that she had lied to them about the lane. They were angry that she had embarrassed the community in front of the sheriff's department. They were angry that the parade had been ruined, and they were angry that the HOA was now facing a bill for thousands of dollars in property damage. Karen was sitting at the front of the room behind a folding table with the other board members, and she looked like a different person. The visor was gone. The polo shirt was replaced by a plain blouse. The clipboard was nowhere in sight. She looked diminished, smaller, like the authority had drained out of her, and left only a tired woman in her late 50s, who had made a very expensive mistake. I sat in the back row with my folder on my lap and waited. The meeting started with Dennis reading a statement. He acknowledged that the board had made an error in claiming the Green Lane as a community access path. He acknowledged that the county records clearly showed the lane was private property. He acknowledged that the parade had caused damage to the hedges, the wall, and the gravel, and that the HOA would be covering the full cost of repairs. And then he said something that made the room go completely silent. In light of these events, he said, Karen Whitmore has offered her resignation as president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, effective immediately. Karen did not speak. She just sat there with her hands folded on the table, staring at a point somewhere in the middle distance. Someone in the audience started to clap, and then someone else joined in, and then the whole room was applauding, not for Karen, but for the end of Karen. I did not clap. I just sat in the back row with my folder and watched the woman who had tried to steal my lane dissolve into the consequences of her own arrogance. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to apologize. Margaret Okonkwo gave me a jar of homemade jam. A man named Bill, who lived 2 streets over, shook my hand and said he had always wondered about that lane and was glad someone had finally stood up to Karen. A young couple with a baby told me they had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago and had already been on the receiving end of Karen's enforcement letters, and they thanked me for doing what they had been too afraid to do. I accepted the apologies and the jam and the handshakes, and then I went home to my quiet house and my damaged hedges and my empty green lane. The repair crew came the following week. The horticulturist pruned the broken branches and applied a treatment to encourage new growth. A stonemason rebuilt the section of wall that had been damaged. A gravel truck dumped fresh crushed stone on the lane, and I spent an afternoon raking it smooth. The total bill came to $6,940, and the HOA paid it within 30 days, as stipulated in the agreement that Dennis and I had worked out. I also had them install a sign at the entrance to the lane, a simple metal sign on a post that said private property, no trespassing. The sign was not for me. I knew whose land it was. The sign was for everyone else, so that no future HOA president would ever make the same mistake. Karen Whitmore moved out of Oakwood Preserve in September. I heard from Margaret that she had sold her house and relocated to a condo in a neighboring town, a place with no HOA and no green lanes and no parades. I did not feel sorry for her. I felt sorry for the hedges, which would take another year to fully recover. I felt sorry for my mother's memory, which had been disrespected by a woman who saw a living thing as an obstacle to her event. But I did not feel sorry for Karen. She had built her authority on assumptions and laminated maps and the willingness of other people to stay quiet. She had never encountered someone who kept a folder. She had never encountered someone who understood that the real power in a property dispute is not volume or social pressure or the number of people who show up with golf carts. The real power is the record, the deed, the survey, the quiet title judgment, the abandonment document, the permission letter with an expiration date, the certified copy with a county stamp. Paper remembers what people try to forget, and the paper in my folder had remembered everything. I still walk the green lane most evenings, after work, when the light is low and the shadows from the hedges stretch across the gravel. The new sign is holding up well. The wall is solid. The hedges are growing back, slowly, the new leaves a brighter green than the old ones. I think about my mother sometimes, about the spring she spent planting those boxwoods, about the way she would stand back and look at them, with her hands on her hips and a satisfied expression on her face. She would have liked the sign. She would have liked the folder. She would have liked the way the whole thing ended, not with a shout, but with a deputy reading a county record and a room full of people realizing they had been lied to. Some people think authority comes from being loud. Real ownership is quieter than that. It is a deed in a filing cabinet. It is a survey stake in the ground. It is a hedge that grows back, year after year. no matter who tries to tear it down. I reached the end of the lane and turned around, looking back at the house with its porch light just coming on, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. The lane was mine. It had always been mine, and now everyone knew it.